south of the country, very close to the front lines, was hit. More than a dozen. So.
Okay, Hugo.
Russian forces launch a massive barrage of missile strikes against Ukraine in response to what the Kremlin has designated a terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge. And Russian officials are promising this is just the beginning. What's going to happen from here? Well, that's what we're going to be answering in this video. We're going to analyze what's going on with this missile attack and what we can expect next. And make sure to stick with me to the very end of this video when I'll reveal that what's happening right now, right before our very eyes, is nothing less than the dawn of a new world political order. Russian forces launched dozens of missiles this morning that landed in multiple Ukrainian cities, most notably in the capital city of Kiev, in a massive escalation of the Ukrainian conflict. Reports range anywhere from 80 to even as high as 300 missiles struck their respective targets throughout the nation, such as Ukrainian military, communications, and energy infrastructure, as reported by the Russian Defense Ministry, which did confirm that all strategic targets were neutralized in this massive attack. Now, this is a clear escalation in a war that's been fought on at least two major fronts. There's a military front and there's a monetary front. The monetary front, of course, came into focus with the blitzkrieg of sanctions against Russia imposed by the United States, the EU, as well as Japan and Taiwan. And yet, in an absolutely stunning display of foresight, Russia emerged from the smoke of that blitzkrieg in many respects financially stronger than ever. In fact, The Economist went so far as to say that few, if anyone, believed Russia could withstand such economic sanctions. But of course, that's because The Economist is in a liberal echo chamber. We here on this channel knew from day one that Russia had been busy building what scholars call a civilization state over the last decade. If anyone actually bothered to read Putin's speeches, he'd been talking about the necessity of reviving the ancient Orthodox Russian world in order for Russia to ultimately overthrow what he called, in his recent annexation speech, the insane satanic forces of the woke West. So we have to see what's happening here from the vantage point of a military front as well as a monetary front. Now, I've got to say, as I unpack this, well, I almost hate to say it, but at this point, look, really, it's time to just throw away the lamestream media. And I'm even including Fox News and Newsmax on this, except for Tucker. Even Sky News Australia, both Sky News and Fox are owned by Rupert Murdoch, who hates Putin. He hates Russia. So throw those away. The British media takes the cake in this. They're the worst in their coverage. I mean, American legacy media is bad enough. But look at this headline from The Guardian. The massive missile strikes in Ukraine are an act of desperation on Putin's part. Yeah, Putin's desperate. He's frantic. He's at the end of his rope, and he doesn't know what else to do but launch a bunch of missiles at Ukraine, while Ukraine stands undaunted as the single greatest symbol of democracy the world has ever known. The level of gaslighting that's going on right now with these utterly massive missile attacks, which Putin made clear today are just an appetizer, is totally indicative of a decrepit, corrupt political class of aristocratic elites completely removed from reality. They're in total denial. They're euphoric from smoking their copium continuously. And they just can't conceive of the kind of end this is all moving towards, which we're going to be unpacking for you in this video. But first, make sure to click on that link below and let's together support Mike Lindell. Mike is offering us his lowest prices ever on all of his products. If you use my code Turley, you can now get the classic MyPillow, which is normally $69.98 for just $19.98, and that applies to over 200 products in their catalog. So don't wait. Click on that link below. Let's support our fellow patriot, Mike Lindell, and let's get his best savings ever. All right. Let's start with Colonel Doug Macgregor, the only person on mainstream TV via Fox generally, and that via Tucker Carlson, who truly understands what's going on in my assessment here. Here's his assessment of why Russia annexed those 4 eastern Ukrainian regions and why we're seeing a major escalation.
and talk about other things. I think at that point they figured this is a waste of time. These people aren't interested in negotiating an end to the conflict. At that point, they took stock and they said, okay, we're going to strike back, but we're not going to strike back in piecemeal fashion. We're not going to launch a series of offensives to drive back the Ukrainians. What we're going to do is take what we had originally thought was Russian anyway, which of course is, the people that live there are Russians in those areas. Then we are going to build up for a major offensive. If they will not cooperate, if they will not recognize the legitimacy of our position, then we will launch it and we will terminate this conflict on our terms. Well, you got to keep in mind that this is a theater that's almost 800 miles deep and certainly 500-600 miles wide. It's a vast area that requires a lot of time to position forces, move forces. This applies to Ukrainians, it applies to the Russians. And now I think what we are on the verge of seeing is this major offensive. He may actually approach the Ukrainians one more time. And then if he has no success and no one will talk, I think he's going to unloose hell, frankly. And we're going to see a very different Russian military establishment doing things that, frankly, people like me and others thought they would do much earlier. But again, the man did not want to kill civilians, contrary to what is said in the West. He didn't want to damage lots of infrastructure. His view was, we want to live with Ukrainians when this is over. So we want minimal damage. We want early talks and negotiations. It all failed. No longer matters. If there's no final willingness to talk, then I think we will see what I and others thought would happen early on, a massive, uninterrupted, devastating assault throughout the country.
Now, the thesis put forward here explains why Putin began this campaign with what some were calling a soft war, meaning they were only hitting military targets. The Russian military didn't touch Ukrainian infrastructure. They left power grids. They left the internet intact and so on. It was a very strictly limited special military operation that sought to get the Ukrainians to the negotiating table, which in turn would have meant that the Ukrainians would recognize the sovereignty of the two breakaway republics, Donetsk and Lugansk. They would recognize the full Russian annexation of Crimea, and they would affirm permanent neutrality towards NATO forces. That's what was, in fact, taking place in Turkey back in March, just a few weeks after the conflict started. Unfortunately, it's widely reported that it was Boris Johnson, one of the most colossal disappointments imaginable in British politics, who lobbied hard against Zelensky accepting any sort of peace deal with Russia. NATO powers, as we see with the absurd antics of our own clown Lindsey Graham and Eye Patch McCain, and even Ted Cruz for that matter, NATO powers are determined to fight this war to the last Ukrainian and supposedly end the Putin regime in the process. Ha ha, good luck. So that peace, having been thwarted, meant after several more months of assessing whether a negotiated peace was possible, having realized that it was not, that means Putin now has decided he's going to end this on his own terms. This conflict will end when Russia and Russia alone says it's time to end. And so, given that there's no possibility of a peaceful settlement, the Kremlin announced that they would never allow Russian regions in eastern Ukraine to ever be ruled by Kiev again. They annexed the 4 regions that create a wonderful land bridge to Crimea. And now, as we talked about on Saturday's video, now with that annexation, Ukraine's attacks on Donetsk and Lugansk and Zaporozhye and Kherson, they're all officially attacks against Russian territorial integrity. So Putin has now purposely put Russia in the position of being the invaded nation. And now he's no longer limited by the strictures and restraints of a special military operation. Here's weapons analyst Scott Ritter on what to expect next.
In his memory, this has to be purged, eliminated from it. That's what denazification means. This means that Ukraine will cease to exist as a modern nation state, and that whatever Ukraine looks like once this conflict ends, it won't be the Ukraine when this conflict started. It won't be the Ukraine today. I think Russia will take even more territory, but it will be a total victory of Russia over Ukraine, a victory that sends a signal to every nation in Europe that war is not the answer, that if you go to war with Russia, this is what happens to you. And I think the Russian victory has to be that complete, and that's what Russia's moving towards. Vladimir Putin hinted at this in his speech, and the mobilization of 300,000 troops, combined with there's an additional mobilization of 70,000 volunteers undergoing right away. So it's not 300,000; it's 370,000, probably closer to 450,000 by the time all the volunteers get processed. These troops combined with the 200,000 give Russia more than enough military capacity to do this. I think Russia is going to be unleashing a strategic air campaign that hasn't existed yet, that is going to shut Ukraine down, destroy it economically, make movement almost impossible. If Zelensky doesn't die from bombing, he's going to be forced into hiding. He won't have the ability to communicate freely with the rest of the world. All of this is about to happen. And when it does, it'll point to a total victory of Russia on the battlefield, the elimination of Ukraine as a modern nation state, and a post-economic crisis Europe that has been transformed through its own internal revolutionary processes to empower a new class of political and economic elites who will be more inclined to work with Russia and less inclined to do the bidding.
And while the pieces to this puzzle are all getting put into place militarily, we have to remember what's happening on the other front of this battle that's just important, and that's the monetary front. What deal did Putin just help secure that basically guarantees Western leaders eventually groveling before him, begging him and OPEC plus nations for oil? Right? Saudi Arabia, along with Russia, got the whole of the OPEC plus organization to decrease 2 million barrels a day. It's 2% of their world barrels a day in order to raise the price of oil. And that decision was explicitly made by OPEC plus nations in response to the blitzkrieg of Western sanctions imposed on Russia. Up until last week, bumbling Biden, as well as Europe's liberal globalist leaders, they had been begging OPEC to produce more oil and ease gas prices, both to relieve their respective populations' pain at the pump, not to mention their rising heating prices with the coming of winter, but most importantly, hit Moscow in the pocket as a further sanction against their war in Ukraine. OPEC, in effect, told both Biden and Brussels to shove it. Even CNN admitted it was a horrific humiliation for the Biden White House. OPEC nations have, with these actions of raising the price of oil, they've announced they are thoroughly on the side of Russia, and they believe a new world order is rising where NATO powers no longer have the power or influence they once had. As you can see, Putin is not desperate. He's not at the end of his rope. Throw away all of that silly fake news gaslighting. Putin is part of a new rising world, a world that no longer abides by the rules set for it by the dolts in D.C. or the bullies in Brussels. Putin has the whole of that world, nearly 80% of the global population behind him. There's nothing the woke West can do. A new world is rising, and what's about to happen in Ukraine is its proof. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You will definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on the moment CNN suddenly realized it's all over. You're going to love it. So make sure to click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.